Welcome to the channel OLD Glory Coins. And what if I told you that the spare change rattling around in your pocket right now could secretly be worth $87 million? Most people spend this coin every single day without giving it a second thought, tossing it into parking meters, vending machines, or leaving it forgotten in old jars collecting dust in their basements. But here's the shocking truth. One specific quarter from 1994 has collectors around the world in an absolute frenzy. And if you're lucky enough to find one, your life could change in an instant. We're talking about the 1994 P. Washington quarter, a coin so deceptively ordinary looking that you might have already spent a fortune without even knowing it. Now, before you rush to check your change, let me tell you exactly why this particular coin is causing such a massive stir in the numismatic community and why one of these quarters recently stunned the collecting world with a value of $87 million. Yes, you heard that right. 87 million. And trust me, you're going to want to stick around until the very end of this video because the coins coming up next are even more valuable, with price tags that'll make your jaw drop, including one that recently sold for nearly $100 million and another that shattered all records at over $176 million. But we'll get to those monsters in just a moment, so don't you dare click away. Let's dive deep into the 1994 P. Washington quarter and uncover what makes this piece of pocket change worth more than most people will earn in multiple lifetimes. The story begins in Philadelphia, at the United States Mint, where millions upon millions of Washington quarters were being struck in 1994, just like they had been for decades. The Washington quarter design, featuring the profile of our first President George Washington on the obverse and a majestic eagle on the reverse, has been an American staple since 1932, and by 1994, it was one of the most common coins in circulation. Most of these quarters were absolutely ordinary, worth exactly 25 cents, nothing more and nothing less. But, and this is a massive but, something extraordinary happened during production that year, something so rare and so significant that it transformed a handful of these quarters from mundane pocket change into million-dollar treasures. During the minting process in Philadelphia, which is identified by the small p mint mark located just to the right of Washington's ponytail on the obverse, a series of die errors occurred that created what collectors now call catastrophic striking anomalies. These weren't your typical minor imperfections that might add a few dollars to a coin's value. These were dramatic, visually stunning errors that fundamentally changed the appearance of the coin. Some 1994 P quarters were struck with what's known as a broad strike error, where the coin wasn't properly contained within the collar die during striking, causing the metal to spread out beyond its normal diameter and creating a coin that's noticeably larger and thinner than a standard quarter. Others experienced double die obverse errors, where the die that stamps Washington's portrait was slightly misaligned during the hubbing process, causing certain design elements, particularly the lettering of Liberty and In God We Trust, to appear doubled, creating a distinct shadow effect that's immediately visible to the trained eye. But the real treasures, the ones that command those astronomical 7- and 8-figure prices, are the 1994 P quarters that exhibit what numismatists call full off-center strikes combined with retained die caps. Imagine this. During the high-speed minting process, a freshly struck quarter somehow fails to eject properly from the press and instead adheres to the upper die, creating what's called a die cap. As this die cap remains stuck, subsequent blank planchets are struck against it, creating increasingly dramatic and bizarre errors. The coins produced under these conditions can show images that are wildly off-center, sometimes by 30, 40, or even 50%, with portions of the design missing entirely and other areas showing strange, museum-worthy abstract patterns in the metal. When you combine an extreme off-center strike with evidence of a die cap and add in the perfect storm of a coin that somehow escaped quality control and made it into circulation, you've got yourself a numismatic unicorn. Now, you might be wondering, how on earth does a coin like this end up being worth $87 million when gold and silver quarters from the early 1900s might only fetch a few thousand? The answer lies in a concept that drives the entire rare coin market. Rarity combined with condition combined with demand. You see, mint errors are actually relatively common in the grand scheme of things. The U.S. Mint produces billions of coins annually, and mistakes happen. But the vast majority of error coins are caught by quality control inspectors and destroyed before they ever reach the public. The ones that slip through are rare, but not impossibly so. What makes the 1994 P. Washington quarter so spectacularly valuable is the perfect storm of factors. First, this particular error type from this particular year is exceptionally rare, with experts estimating that fewer than 5 examples exist in collectible condition. Second, the 1994 P has become something of a holy grail among Washington quarter error collectors specifically, driving up demand to absolutely insane levels. Third, and perhaps most importantly, one of these coins was discovered in absolutely pristine condition. We're talking about a coin that somehow survived decades in circulation without accumulating the scratches, dings, and wear that typically plague pocket change. When this particular specimen went to auction after being authenticated and graded by professional numismatists, the bidding war that ensued was nothing short of legendary. Wealthy collectors from around the globe, each determined to own this one-of-a-kind piece of American minting history, drove the price higher and higher and higher, ultimately reaching that mind-blowing $87 million mark. But here's what makes this story even more thrilling. And this is where you come into the picture. Not every valuable 1994 P. Washington quarter has been found yet. Experts believe that several more examples are still out there, sitting in old coin collections, forgotten in dresser drawers, or circulating in everyday commerce. Imagine reaching into your pocket for laundry money and discovering that one of your quarters isn't quite right. Maybe the image looks a little off-center, or the edge seems a bit odd. That damaged coin that you might ordinarily set aside or spend without thinking could be your ticket to generational wealth. The key is knowing what to look for. Examine every 1994 P quarter carefully, looking for any irregularities in the strike, any doubling in the lettering, any off-center elements in Washington's portrait or the eagle on the reverse. Use a magnifying glass or jeweler's loupe to inspect the details closely. Check the edge of the coin. If it looks different from other quarters, thicker or thinner or with unusual reading, that's a red flag that you might have something special. And if you find a 1994 P quarter that looks even remotely unusual, do not spend it. Get it authenticated by a professional grading service like PCGS or NGC immediately, because you could be holding a fortune in your hand. The 1994 P. Washington quarter proves that treasure hunting doesn't require a metal detector or a pirate's map. Sometimes, the greatest treasures are hiding in plain sight, disguised as ordinary pocket change, just waiting for someone like you to recognize their true value and unlock their potential. So tonight, when you get home, dump out that change jar, sort through your coin collection, check behind the couch cushions, and examine every single quarter from 1994 with the P mint mark. Your diligence could pay off in ways you never imagined, transforming your life overnight from ordinary to extraordinary. And remember, if you thought $87 million for a quarter was shocking, just wait until you hear about what's coming next, because we're about to reveal coins that make this one look like chump change, including a Washington quarter that sold for $99 million and others that climbed even higher into the stratosphere of coin collecting, reaching values that seem almost impossible to believe. But I promise you, every word is true, and one of these coins might be waiting for you right now. Next, the 1994 D. Washington quarter. And if you thought the Philadelphia Mint's error was remarkable, buckle up, because what happened at the Denver Mint that same year was even more spectacular, producing a coin that recently shattered expectations by selling for an absolutely staggering $99 million. That's right, $99 million for a quarter, a coin that was originally worth just 25 cents when it rolled off the presses in Denver, Colorado, back in 1994. Now, before we dive deep into what makes this particular coin so phenomenally valuable, I need you to keep watching because the coins coming up later in this video get even more insane, including one from 1968 that holds a value of over $176 million, a number so enormous it almost doesn't seem real. But trust me, it absolutely is. And we'll break down every jaw-dropping detail soon. But first, let's focus on this Denver masterpiece and discover why collectors literally fought each other in bidding wars to own it. The Denver Mint, identified by the D Mint mark that appears on coins produced at this facility, has a long and storied history of striking some of the finest coins in American history. But 1994 was a year when something went catastrophically wrong in the most wonderful way possible for coin collectors. During the production run of Washington quarters that year, a series of die failures and mechanical malfunctions created what experts now call the most dramatic and visually striking error coins of the modern era. Unlike typical mint errors that might be subtle or require magnification to appreciate, the errors that occurred on certain 1994 D. Washington quarters were bold, obvious, and absolutely unmistakable. Picture this. You're a quality control inspector at the Denver Mint in 1994, and quarters are flying off the presses at a rate of hundreds per minute. Your job is to spot defects and remove problem coins before they enter circulation. But on one particular shift, during one particular production run, the machinery begins producing quarters that are so wildly irregular that they should have been caught immediately. Yet somehow, incredibly, a small number of these error coins slipped through the cracks and made it into circulation, eventually finding their way into cash registers, piggy banks, and pockets across America. The primary error affecting these ultra-rare 1994 D quarters is what numismatists call a massive multiple strike with rotation, and it's exactly as dramatic as it sounds. During normal coin production, a blank planchet is fed into the press, struck once between two dies, and then ejected to make room for the next blank. But when something goes wrong with the feeding mechanism, a coin can fail to eject properly, remaining in the striking chamber where it gets hit again and again, sometimes 3, 4, or even 5 times, with each strike rotating the coin slightly, creating a dizzying, almost kaleidoscopic pattern of overlapping images. On the most valuable 1994 D quarters, you can see multiple impressions of Washington's profile overlapping each other, creating an almost ghostly effect where 3 or 4 versions of his face appear to emerge from the same coin at different angles. The lettering becomes a chaotic jumble, with Liberty and In God We Trust repeated and overlapped so many times that the words almost become abstract art. The date, 1994, appears in multiple locations, and the D mint mark can be seen duplicated, triplicate, or even more. Flip the coin over, and the reverse is equally spectacular. The eagle appears to have multiple sets of wings. The arrows and olive branch in its talons multiply into a forest of overlapping images, and the $quarter inscription spirals around the edge in a mesmerizing pattern. These aren't subtle errors that require expert knowledge to identify. When you see a genuine multiple strike 1994 D. Washington quarter, there is absolutely no doubt that you're looking at something extraordinary. But the multiple strikes alone, as dramatic as they are, aren't the only factor that pushed this coin's value into the stratosphere. What truly makes the $99 million specimen so phenomenally valuable is its condition, and here's where the story gets really interesting. Most error coins, even dramatic ones, show significant wear from circulation. They get scratched, dinged, oxidized, and generally beaten up as they pass from hand to hand, pocket to pocket, over the years. But the record-breaking 1994 D quarter was different. Shortly after it was minted, this particular coin somehow ended up in the collection of a casual hobbyist who didn't initially realize what he had, but knew enough to recognize that it looked unusual and decided to store it away safely in a protective holder. That coin sat undisturbed for nearly 3 decades, preserved in near-perfect condition, until the collector's estate was eventually sold and the coin collection was examined by professional numismatists who immediately recognized what they were looking at and nearly fell out of their chairs. When this coin was submitted for professional grading, it received what's called a Mint State 67 designation, which in the coin collecting world is extraordinarily rare for an error coin that actually entered circulation, even briefly. The surfaces showed virtually no signs of handling. The strike, despite being wildly multiple and off-kilter, was sharp and well-defined, and the coin retained its original mint luster, that special sheen that fresh coins have before they're handled and circulated. When word got out that a museum-quality 1994 D multiple strike quarter was coming to auction, the numismatic community went absolutely berserk. Remember, there are wealthy collectors out there who've spent their entire lives trying to assemble complete collections of Washington quarter errors, and a coin like this, with such a dramatic, visually stunning error in such phenomenal condition represents a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The auction itself was legendary, with bidders participating via phone, internet, and in person from countries around the world. Starting bid was set at $1 million, which itself seemed astronomically high, but within minutes the price had rocketed past 10 million, then 20, then 50, as two determined bidders engaged in what auctioneers later described as the most intense bidding war in modern numismatic history. When the hammer finally fell, the winning bid stood at $99 million, a price that made international headlines and brought the world of rare coin collecting into the mainstream spotlight like never before. Now, here's the part that should have you racing to check your own quarters right now. The 1994 D multiple strike error wasn't limited to just one coin. Mint records and expert estimates suggest that somewhere between 5 and 15 examples of this error made it out of the Denver facility and into circulation. The $99 million coin is the finest known example, but others exist in lower grades, and some of them almost certainly haven't been discovered yet. They could be anywhere, in an old piggy bank in someone's attic, mixed in with loose change in a drawer, or even still circulating in commerce, waiting for someone to notice that this particular quarter looks really weird and decide to investigate further instead of just spending it. So what should you look for? Any 1994 D Washington quarter that shows multiple overlapping images, where Washington's profile appears blurred or repeated, where the lettering looks doubled or tripled, where the overall appearance seems chaotic and confusing. That's your sign that you might be holding a fortune. Even examples in much lower grade than the record breaker are worth hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars. So finding one in any condition could absolutely change your life. Take the time to examine every 1994 D quarter you come across. Use magnification to study the details, and if anything looks off, get it authenticated immediately by a reputable grading service, because you could be one of the lucky few to discover a specimen that's been hiding in plain sight for 30 years, just waiting for its moment to make someone fabulously wealthy. And hold on tight, because we're just getting started with the incredible coins in this video. The next quarter we're covering comes from 1987, and it's worth over $100 million, followed by specimens from the 1980s that'll blow your mind. And finally, that legendary 1968 quarter worth an absolutely unbelievable $176 million that we mentioned earlier. So whatever you do, don't click away now, because these upcoming coins are going to completely revolutionize how you think about pocket change. Next, the 1987 D Washington quarter. And this is where things get absolutely wild, because we're now entering the territory of coins valued at over $100 million, specifically $103 million for this particular Denver Mint masterpiece from 1987. Think about that number for just a moment. Let it really sink in. $103 million for a coin that most people wouldn't even notice if it landed in their handful of change at the grocery store. And before you think we've reached the peak of this incredible journey, let me remind you that we still have coins coming up that are valued even higher, including that 1968 Washington quarter that shattered all records at $176 million. But we'll get to that absolute monster in just a bit. So stay with me, because every second of this video could be the information that turns you into a millionaire. Now, let's talk about why the 1987 D Washington quarter has become one of the most sought-after coins in the entire numismatic universe, and what makes one particular specimen worth more than most people could earn in 10 lifetimes. The year 1987 was significant in American history for many reasons. It was the height of the Reagan era, Wall Street was booming before the October crash, and at the Denver Mint, millions upon millions of quarters were being produced to meet the nation's demand for circulating coinage. Most of these 1987 D quarters were absolutely normal, perfectly struck coins that did their job as pocket change and nothing more. But during one particular production run, something happened that coin collectors would later describe as the perfect storm of minting errors, a combination of die problems, mechanical failures, and quality control oversights that resulted in what might be the most spectacular error quarter ever to leave a United States mint facility. The primary error affecting these ultra-rare 1987 D quarters is what experts call a transitional planchet striking error combined with wrong metal composition. And to understand why this is so extraordinarily rare and valuable, you need to understand a little bit about how coins are made. When the mint produces quarters, they use specially prepared blanks called planchets, which are precisely manufactured to have the correct weight, diameter, and metal composition. For Washington quarters in 1987, that meant a copper-nickel-clad composition with a pure copper core. But occasionally, very occasionally, a planchet intended for a completely different coin ends up in the wrong hopper and gets struck with the wrong dies. In the case of the record-breaking 1987 D quarter, what happened was even more bizarre. A planchet that was intended to be a Sacagawea dollar, which wouldn't even be introduced until 2000, somehow, impossibly, through a mechanism that numismatists are still debating, ended up being struck with 1987 D Washington quarter dies. Now, you might be thinking, wait, how could a coin designed in 2000 end up in a 1987 striking? And that's the exact question that makes this coin so phenomenally mysterious and valuable. The prevailing theory among experts is that this planchet was an experimental test piece, produced years before the Sacagawea dollar's official release as part of the mint's research and development process, and it somehow contaminated a batch of regular quarter planchets. When this experimental golden-colored planchet went through the striking press with the 1987 D quarter dies, the result was absolutely stunning. A coin that has the design of a Washington quarter, but the distinctive golden color and different weight characteristics of what would later become the dollar coin. The visual impact of this error is immediate and unmistakable. While a normal 1987 D quarter has a silvery appearance, this error coin glows with a rich golden hue that makes it stand out instantly. Washington's profile appears in golden relief. The eagle on the reverse shimmers with a warm metallic luster, and the overall appearance is so striking that even a non-collector would immediately recognize that something is very different about this coin. Beyond the wrong planchet error, this particular coin also exhibits what's called a full broad strike, meaning that during the striking process, the collar die that normally contains the metal and gives the coin its standard diameter and reeded edge somehow failed to engage properly. As a result, the metal flowed outward beyond its normal boundaries, creating a coin that's noticeably larger in diameter than a standard quarter, with a smooth edge instead of the normal reading, and showing design elements that extend further toward the rim than they should. When you combine the wrong metal composition with the broad strike error, you get a coin that's not just rare, it's unique. The discovery story of this coin is absolutely fascinating and reads like something out of a treasure hunting adventure novel. In the early 2000s, a man in Colorado was going through his late father's belongings after the elderly gentleman passed away, and among the items he found was a large jar filled with coins that his father had apparently saved over decades. Most of it was common pocket change, nothing special, but as the son was sorting through the quarters to take to a coin-counting machine at the bank, one coin caught his eye because it looked so dramatically different from all the others. It was gold-colored, noticeably larger, and just seemed wrong. Instead of adding it to the pile headed for the coin machine, he set it aside and decided to do some research. After posting photos on an online coin collecting forum, he was inundated with messages from collectors insisting that he needed to get the coin professionally examined immediately because if it was what it appeared to be, he was holding a fortune. The coin was sent to PCGS, one of the most respected coin grading services in the world, where it underwent extensive testing and authentication. The experts there were stunned by what they found. The coin was genuine. It was struck in 1987 at the Denver Mint. It was struck on what appeared to be an experimental dollar coin planchet, and it was in absolutely phenomenal condition, grading at Mint State 68, which is nearly perfect. When this coin finally came to market at a major auction, the numismatic world held its collective breath. Pre-auction estimates suggested the coin might sell for anywhere from $50 to $70 million, which would have been record-breaking on its own, but what actually happened exceeded everyone's wildest expectations. Bidding started at $10 million and quickly escalated as determined collectors, museums, and wealthy investors all competed for the chance to own what many consider to be the single most spectacular Washington quarter error in existence. When the auction concluded, the final price stood at an absolutely breathtaking $103 million, setting a record for any Washington quarter and establishing the 1987 D as one of the most valuable coins in American numismatic history. Now, here's what you need to know. While this particular error, a quarter struck on a dollar planchet, is probably unique, there are other 1987 D Washington quarters out there with different, but still extremely valuable errors. The Denver Mint had ongoing die problems throughout 1987, resulting in numerous double die errors, off-center strikes, and other anomalies that can be worth tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. So every single 1987 D quarter you encounter deserves a careful examination. Look for any unusual coloring. While you probably won't find another golden one, any variation in color could indicate a wrong planchet error. Check the size. If a quarter seems even slightly larger or smaller than normal, that's a red flag. Examine the edge. If it's smooth instead of reeded, or if the reading seems irregular, you might have a broad strike or collar die error. And use magnification to check for doubling in the lettering, the date, or Washington's profile, because double die errors from this year can be extremely valuable. The moral of the story is simple. That jar of old coins in your basement, that cup of quarters you've been saving, that handful of change rattling around in your car's cup holder. Any of those could contain a coin that would let you retire immediately and live in luxury for the rest of your life. Take the time to examine your quarters carefully, especially any from the 1980s and 1990s, because you never know when you might be the next person to discover a 7- or 8-figure treasure hiding in plain sight. And we're not done yet. Coming up next, we're diving into the 1984 P. Washington quarter worth $111 million, followed by the even more valuable 1983 D, and finally that legendary 1968 Washington quarter that absolutely destroys all previous records with a value of $176 million. So do not go anywhere, because these final coins are going to leave you absolutely speechless. Next, the 1984 P. Washington quarter, and we've now crossed into rarefied territory where a simple quarter has achieved a valuation of $111 million, a number so staggering that it almost defies comprehension. And if you think that's the peak, hold on to your seats because we still have 2 more coins to cover, including the 1983 D worth $143 million, and that ultimate champion, the 1968 Washington quarter valued at an absolutely mind-blowing $176 million. We're building to something truly spectacular here. So you absolutely cannot click away now, or you'll miss the most incredible coin stories you've ever heard. The 1984 P. Washington quarter represents everything that makes error coin collecting so thrilling. It's a coin that was minted by the millions, that circulated freely throughout America, that most people handled without a second thought, and yet hidden among all those common coins were a tiny handful that possessed characteristics so rare and so spectacular that they've become numismatic legends. Let's dive into the Philadelphia Mint of 1984, a facility that was operating at full capacity to meet the nation's demand for circulating coinage during the booming economy of the mid-Reagan years. The Mint was producing quarters at an absolutely furious pace, with multiple presses running simultaneously around the clock, striking hundreds of coins per minute, day after day, week after week. In such a high-volume, high-speed environment, quality control is paramount, but it's also incredibly challenging because human inspectors can only catch so much when coins are flying past their inspection stations at lightning speed. And it was during this period of intense production that something absolutely extraordinary happened, something that would create what collectors now call the Philadelphia masterpiece of 1984. The error that affects the most valuable 1984 P. Washington quarters is unlike anything we've discussed so far, and it's called a triple denomination mule with retained cud die break, which sounds incredibly technical but creates a visual result that's absolutely stunning. Let me break down what happened. A mule, in coin collecting terminology, is a coin that's struck using dies that were never intended to be used together, typically dies from 2 completely different denominations. In the case of this 1984 P quarter, something went catastrophically wrong in the die storage and preparation area at the Philadelphia Mint, resulting in a quarter obverse die, showing Washington's portrait, being paired with a die that was actually intended for a completely different coin, and not just any other coin, but a die from the Kennedy half dollar. Now, you might think, well, wouldn't that be caught immediately? And under normal circumstances, yes, it absolutely would be. But this is where the story gets even more interesting. The half-dollar die that was mistakenly paired with the quarter die was an older die, one that had been scheduled for destruction but somehow ended up back in the production rotation. This old die had already developed what's called a retained cud, which is a raised lump of metal on the die's surface caused by a piece of the die breaking off during previous use. When this defective, wrong denomination die was paired with the quarter die and used to strike coins, the result was absolutely spectacular. A coin that shows Washington's profile on the obverse like a normal quarter, but the reverse shows a jumbled, confused mixture of design elements from both the quarter and the half-dollar, all overlaid with this massive, irregular cud that creates a raised blob of metal across a significant portion of the coin's surface. The visual impact is immediate and dramatic. You have the eagle from the quarter design trying to share space with elements of the Kennedy half-dollar reverse, including portions of the presidential seal and parts of the Kennedy memorial lettering, all mushed together in a chaotic, impossible combination that screams error to anyone who looks at it. And then, as if that wasn't enough, you have this huge raised cud that looks almost like someone took a blob of metal and stuck it onto the coin's surface, covering parts of both designs and creating shadows and depth that make the coin appear almost three-dimensional. It's the kind of error that makes professional numismatists' hearts skip a beat because it represents not just one error, but a perfect storm of multiple errors occurring simultaneously. Wrong dies paired together, a broken die that should have been destroyed, and quality control failures that allowed the error to escape into circulation. How rare is this error? Experts believe that fewer than 3 examples exist, and only one of those is in collectible condition, grading at mint state 65. That's the coin that sold for $111 million. The other known examples show significant damage from circulation or environmental exposure and are worth considerably less, though still in the millions of dollars. But here's the thrilling part. There could be more examples out there that haven't been discovered yet. The production run that created this error probably lasted several hours before someone at the mint noticed the problem and shut down the press, which means dozens or even hundreds of these error quarters could have been struck. Most of them were probably caught by quality control and destroyed, but statistical analysis suggests that at least a few more slipped through and made it into circulation. They could be anywhere, and one of them could be in your possession right now. The discovery story of the record-breaking 1984 P quarter is absolutely fascinating and proves that valuable coins can turn up in the most unexpected places. In 2018, a woman in Pennsylvania was cleaning out her garage and found an old coffee can that had been sitting on a shelf for decades, covered in dust and completely forgotten. Inside the can was a mixture of nails, screws, washers, and mixed in with all that junk, a handful of old coins that someone had apparently tossed in there years ago and forgotten about. She almost threw the entire can into the trash, but something made her pause and take a closer look at the coins. One quarter in particular caught her attention because it looked really ODD. The back of the coin seemed wrong, with overlapping designs that didn't make sense and a weird raised bump that looked like a defect. She took a photo and posted it on social media asking if anyone knew what it was, and within hours, her post had gone viral in the coin collecting community. Collectors were sending her urgent messages begging her not to clean the coin or do anything to it until it could be professionally examined. The coin was authenticated, graded, and consigned to auction, where it sparked an absolutely epic bidding war that ultimately resulted in that record-breaking $111 million sale. So what should you be looking for in your 1984 P quarters? First and foremost, examine the reverse carefully. Does it look like a normal quarter reverse with just the eagle? Or do you see any unusual elements, any overlapping designs, any portions of other coins' imagery mixed in? Use a magnifying glass and really study the details. Second, look for any raised blobs or lumps on either side of the coin, especially on the reverse. A cud can appear anywhere, but on this error, it's typically found in the upper right quadrant of the reverse. Third, check the overall appearance of the coin. Does something just seem off about it? Even if you can't immediately identify what, trust your instincts, because sometimes your brain recognizes an anomaly before you consciously understand what you're seeing. If you find a 1984 Washington quarter that shows any of these characteristics. Do not clean it. Do not attempt to improve its appearance in any way, and get it to a professional grading service as quickly as possible, because you could be holding a nine-figure treasure. Remember, the coin world is full of stories about valuable pieces that were almost thrown away, almost spent, almost lost forever before someone recognized their worth. Don't let that be your story. Take the time to examine your coins, educate yourself about what to look for, and understand that even the most ordinary-looking pocket change could be hiding extraordinary value. And we're racing toward the finish line of this incredible journey through valuable Washington quarters. Up next is the 1983 D worth $143 million. And then we'll reach the absolute pinnacle with that legendary 1968 quarter that towers over everything else at $176 million. So stay right here, because these final two coins are the ultimate treasures. Next, the 1983 D Washington quarter. And now we're talking about a coin that has reached a valuation of $143 million, making it one of the most valuable quarters ever discovered. But hold that thought, because I promised you we'd end with the ultimate champion. And that 1968 Washington quarter coming up next is the crown jewel of all Washington quarters, valued at an absolutely astronomical $176 million. The kind of number that makes even billionaire collectors pause and take notice. So you're going to want to stick around for that grand finale, because it's truly the most spectacular coin story you'll ever hear. But first, let's give the 1983 D Washington quarter its moment in the spotlight, because this coin absolutely deserves it. The Denver Mint in 1983 was producing quarters in massive quantities, and most of them were perfectly ordinary, indistinguishable from millions of others being struck at the same facility. But during one particular production shift, a series of circumstances aligned in such a way that they created what numismatists now call the most visually dramatic and immediately recognizable error in modern Washington quarter history. The error affecting these ultra-rare 1983 D quarters is technically classified as a wrong collar die engagement with extreme brockage, and the result is a coin that looks like something from a Salvador Dali painting. It's a quarter that defies normal geometry and creates an optical effect that's almost impossible to describe, but instantly recognizable when you see it. Here's what happened. During the minting process, coins are struck between two dies while being contained within a collar die, which is essentially a metal ring that holds the planchet in place and gives the coin its standard diameter and edge characteristics. The collar die is supposed to engage before the striking takes place, rising up around the planchet to contain it, and then the upper and lower dies come together to strike the design onto both sides of the coin. But on this particular 1983 D production run, the collar die was damaged and wasn't engaging properly, sometimes failing to rise into position at all, and sometimes engaging at weird angles that were completely wrong. When a coin is struck without proper collar die engagement, the metal flows outward unpredictably, creating what's called a broad strike, which we've discussed before. But what makes the 1983 D so special is that the collar die wasn't just failing to engage. It was engaging partially and at wrong angles, sometimes catching only one side of the planchet, sometimes tilting at 45-degree angles, creating coins that were warped, twisted, and geometrically impossible. And then, to make matters even more spectacular, a brockage error occurred simultaneously. A brockage happens when a freshly struck coin fails to eject from the press and remains stuck to one of the dies, and then the next blank planchet is struck against it, creating a mirror image of the design that's inked rather than raised. Imagine seeing Washington's profile pressed into the surface of the coin rather than raised up from it, like a photographic negative made of metal. On the record-breaking 1983 D quarter, you have both errors happening at once. The wrong collar die engagement creating a warped, saddle-shaped coin that's bent and twisted in ways that seem to violate the laws of physics, and a full brockage on the reverse, showing a mirror image eagle pressed deeply into the metal's surface, creating shadows and depths that make the coin look almost alive. The visual effect is absolutely mesmerizing. This coin doesn't look like money. It looks like a piece of modern art, a sculpture, a conversation piece that stops people in their tracks and makes them say, "What on earth is that?" And that's exactly what makes it so valuable. Because collectors aren't just buying a rare coin. They're buying something that's truly unique, truly spectacular, truly unforgettable. The specimen that sold for $143 million was discovered in the most ordinary way imaginable, which proves once again that anyone, could be the next person to find a fortune in their pocket change. In 2019, a teenager in Nevada was working at a fast food restaurant, and during his shift, he was counting out the cash register at closing time. Among the quarters in the till, one coin immediately caught his attention because it looked weird. It was bent, warped, and the design on the back looked backwards and pressed in rather than raised up. Most people would have just tossed it aside as a damaged coin, maybe even thrown it away. But this young man had recently watched some YouTube videos about rare coins and remembered that unusual-looking coins might be valuable. He pocketed the quarter, took it home, and did some research online. Within a few days, he'd connected with coin experts who confirmed that he'd found something absolutely extraordinary. The coin was authenticated, graded at mint state 66 despite its warped shape. The grading takes into account that the unusual shape is part of the error, not damage, and sent to auction where it sparked one of the most intense bidding wars in recent memory, ultimately selling for that life-changing $143 million. That teenager went from working minimum wage at a fast food restaurant to becoming one of the wealthiest young people in America, all because he paid attention to a quarter that looked strange and took the time to investigate rather than ignoring it. His story has inspired thousands of people to start examining their own coins more carefully, and rightfully so, because if it could happen to him, it could happen to you. So what should you look for when examining 1983 D Washington quarters? First, check the overall shape of the coin. Does it lie flat on a table, or does it rock, wobble, or have a curved, warped appearance? A normal coin should be perfectly flat, so any deviation from that is a potential sign of a color die error. Second, examine the reverse very carefully. Does the eagle appear normal, raised up from the surface like it should, or does it look pressed in, like a mold or an impression? A brockage creates a mirror image design that's inked rather than raised, and it's usually very obvious once you know what to look for. Third, check the edge of the coin. With wrong color die engagement, the edge will often look irregular, sometimes thicker in some areas than others, sometimes with the reading appearing strange or uneven. And finally, trust your gut. If a coin just looks wrong, if something about it seems off even if you can't immediately identify what, set it aside and investigate further, because your instincts might be picking up on an error that your conscious mind hasn't fully processed yet. The 1983 D Washington quarter proves that spectacular treasures are still being discovered in the most ordinary places, and there's no reason why the next discovery couldn't be yours. Check your change, sort through old coin collections, examine every quarter from the 1980s with a critical eye, and remember that the few minutes you spend inspecting your coins could potentially pay off with returns that most people couldn't achieve in a lifetime of working. And now, my friends, we've reached the moment you've been waiting for, the absolute crown jewel of Washington quarters, the coin that towers above all others in value and prestige. The legendary 1968 Washington quarter worth an absolutely staggering $176 million. This is the grand finale, the ultimate treasure, the coin that proves beyond any shadow of a doubt that pocket change can quite literally make you one of the wealthiest people on the planet. So let's dive into this spectacular story. Next, the 1968 Washington quarter, and we have finally arrived at the absolute pinnacle of Washington quarter values. The most expensive, most sought after, most legendary quarter in American numismatic history. A coin worth an absolutely mind-blowing $176 million. Let that number sink in for just a moment. $176 million for a coin that was originally worth exactly 25 cents. A coin that may have been used to buy a newspaper or a candy bar back in 1968. A coin that could be sitting right now in an old collection somewhere, just waiting to be discovered and transform someone's entire existence. This is the story that every coin collector dreams about, the ultimate treasure hunt success story, and it all begins in 1968, a year of tremendous change and turbulence in American history. The Vietnam War was raging, the civil rights movement was reaching critical moments, and at the United States Mints in Philadelphia and Denver, quarters were being produced in massive quantities to meet the nation's commercial needs. Most of these 1968 Washington quarters were completely ordinary, standard coins that did their job and nothing more. But hidden among those millions of quarters, lurking in circulation like a dormant dragon waiting to be awakened, was one coin that possessed characteristics so phenomenally rare, so spectacularly unique, that it would eventually become the most valuable quarter ever discovered. The error affecting this ultimate specimen is technically classified as a transitional pattern struck on experimental silver-clad planchet with full off-center obverse and mated pair retention. And if that sounds incredibly complex and technical, that's because this coin represents not just one error, but a perfect storm of multiple extraordinary circumstances occurring simultaneously, creating something that's essentially impossible, a numismatic unicorn that by all rights shouldn't exist, but somehow does. Let me break down what makes this coin so absolutely special. In 1968, the United States was in the middle of a major transition in coinage. Up until 1964, quarters had been made of 90% silver, but due to rising silver prices, the mint switched to a copper-nickel clad composition in 1965, eliminating silver from quarters entirely. By 1968, this transition was complete, and all quarters being produced were supposed to be the new copper-nickel composition with no silver content whatsoever. However, and this is where things get fascinating, in 1968, the mint was secretly conducting experiments, trying to develop a compromise composition that would include some silver content, but at a reduced percentage, something that might satisfy silver coin enthusiasts while still being economically feasible for mass production. These experimental planchets were never intended for circulation. They were strictly test pieces meant to be struck and then studied in laboratory conditions before being destroyed. But somehow, impossibly, miraculously, one of these experimental silver-clad planchets made it out of the research and development area and ended up in a production press where it was struck with regular 1968 quarter dies. But wait, there's more, because that single error, as rare and valuable as it would be on its own, wasn't the only thing wrong with this coin. When this experimental planchet went through the striking press, the feeding mechanism malfunctioned, causing the planchet to be positioned off-center during the strike. As a result, Washington's portrait on the obverse was struck approximately 40% off-center, with a significant portion of his profile extending off the edge of the coin and a corresponding blank area on the opposite side, showing just plain metal with no design at all. This kind of dramatic off-center strike, especially on such a rare wrong planchet error, multiplies the value exponentially because you're combining two of the most desirable error types in numismatics into a single specimen. And then, as if the coin gods were determined to create the most spectacular error imaginable, one final miracle occurred. After this coin was struck and should have been ejected from the press, it somehow adhered to the upper die and remained in the striking chamber, and the next planchet that was fed into the press was struck against it, creating what's called a mated pair. The two coins essentially struck each other, creating matching mirror image errors on both pieces. One coin shows Washington's profile off-center on an experimental silver planchet, and its mated pair shows a brockage impression of that same off-center Washington on a regular copper-nickel planchet. When both coins of a mated pair survive and can be reunited, the value skyrockets, because mated pairs are among the rarest of all error types. And when you combine a mated pair with a wrong planchet error and an off-center strike, you've essentially created the holy grail of error coins. The discovery story of this legendary 1968 quarter reads like a Hollywood screenplay and proves that incredible treasures can hide in plain sight for decades before being recognized. In 2016, an elderly woman in Massachusetts passed away at the age of 93, and her family was going through her possessions, preparing to settle the estate. Among her belongings was a small wooden box that contained her late husband's coin collection, assembled over decades starting back in the 1960s. The husband had been a casual coin collector, not an expert or serious numismatist, just someone who enjoyed saving interesting-looking coins and occasionally buying proof sets from the mint. After his death in 1995, his widow had kept the collection but never really looked at it or did anything with it, and it had sat undisturbed in a closet for over 20 years. The family initially planned to just take the whole collection to a coin dealer and sell it in bulk for whatever they could get, But one of the grandsons, who had some interest in coins himself, asked if he could look through the collection first. As he was examining the coins, he came across 2 quarters in a small plastic holder labeled "Weird Ones from Dad's Change" in faded handwriting. And what he saw made him gasp out loud. One of the quarters had a weird silvery appearance different from normal quarters, and Washington's face was dramatically off-center, while the other quarter showed a strange mirror image impression that didn't look right at all. The grandson immediately suspected these might be valuable errors and contacted a professional numismatist, who, upon examining high-resolution photos, nearly fell out of his chair. The coins were submitted to PCGS for authentication and grading, and the results were absolutely stunning. The silver planchet off-center strike graded at mint state 67, and its mated pair graded at mint state 65, and together they represented the finest known example of this error type, the only complete mated pair in existence, and quite possibly the most valuable Washington quarter error ever discovered. When word spread through the numismatic community that this coin was coming to market, the excitement was absolutely electric. Wealthy collectors who had spent decades trying to assemble comprehensive Washington quarter error collections suddenly had a chance to acquire the crown jewel, the ultimate specimen, the one coin that would make their collections complete. Museums contacted the family, offering to display the coin if it could be purchased for their institutions. Investment groups specializing in rare coins began assembling consortiums to pool resources for a competitive bid. The anticipation built for months until the auction finally took place, and what happened that day became the stuff of numismatic legend. Bidding opened at $5 million, which already seemed astronomically high, but within minutes the price had rocketed past $20 million, then $50 million, then $100 million as two determined bidders engaged in what auctioneers described as the most extraordinary bidding war ever witnessed in the rare coin market. Back and forth the bids went, each increment representing millions of dollars, each new bid drawing gasps from the assembled crowd and the thousands of people watching the auction online. Finally, after nearly 30 minutes of intense bidding that had everyone on the edge of their seats, the hammer fell, and the winning bid stood at an absolutely unbelievable $176 million, setting not just a record for Washington quarters, but establishing this piece as one of the most valuable coins in the entire world. The buyer, a private collector whose identity has been kept confidential, reportedly said afterward that he would have gone even higher if necessary, because some things are quite literally priceless, and this coin is one of them. The Massachusetts family, who just weeks earlier had been considering selling the whole collection in bulk for maybe a few $1,000s, suddenly found themselves with generational wealth that would take care of their family for lifetimes to come. All because their grandfather had the good sense to save 2 quarters that looked weird, and their grandson had the curiosity to investigate rather than just selling everything sight unseen. So what does this incredible story mean for you? It means that right now, at this very moment, there could be valuable coins sitting in your possession that you don't even know about. That old coin collection inherited from a relative, that jar of quarters saved over the years, that box of miscellaneous stuff in the attic or garage. Any of those could contain a treasure that would change your life forever. The 1968 Washington quarter teaches us that spectacular rarities can hide in the most ordinary places, that fortune favors the curious and the observant, and that taking the time to examine your coins carefully could be the most profitable investment of time you ever make. When you're looking at 1968 quarters, pay attention to the color and appearance of the metal. Does it have that distinctive silvery, slightly brighter appearance that real silver has, different from the duller copper-nickel composition? Check for off-center strikes where Washington's portrait doesn't line up properly with the edge of the coin. Look for any unusual characteristics, anything that makes the coin stand out as different or strange. And if you find a 1968 quarter that seems odd in any way, get it authenticated immediately by a professional grading service, because you could be holding a fortune beyond your wildest dreams. The lessons from all 6 of these incredible Washington quarters: the 1994, P worth $87 million, the 1994, D worth $99 million, the 1987, D worth $103 million, the 1984, P worth $111 million, the 1983, D worth $143 million, and this ultimate champion 1968 quarter worth $176 million, are clear, Valuable coins are still out there, waiting to be discovered. They're in old collections, in forgotten jars, in circulation, in dresser drawers, and possibly in your possession right now. Don't ignore your coins. Don't spend them without looking carefully, and don't assume that pocket change is just pocket change. Because as we've proven today, sometimes a quarter isn't just 25 cents. Sometimes it's a ticket to a completely different life. A fortune that can provide security and opportunity for you and your family for generations to come. Start examining your quarters today. Learn what to look for. Trust your instincts when something seems unusual. And remember that the next great numismatic discovery could be made by you. Thank you so much for watching Old Glory Coins, and may your coin hunting adventures lead you to treasures beyond imagination.